Hello and welcome back inside the Parc Fermé for podcast number 801. This is Todd.
No, Todd, not now!
AKA Negative Camber. You know why I've asked you here.
You must convince the villagers that I'm harmless.
That's exactly what I need you to do. Tonight, for your kind consideration, we're going to talk about, well, stuff. We're going to talk about us, but we're also going to talk about news. You know, I can't leave you hanging out there. Before doing that, I have to introduce my co-host, which of course means, that's right, I got to go all the way to the right coast of our nation, nestled in our nation's capital, where she applies her skills as a master statistician, doing things and really complex stuff that no one can really know. She's that kind of person. You love her, you know her. It's the lovely, the redoubtable Grace. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Todd. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Grace, let me just right up front congratulate you, my old partner in crime. 800 podcasts we've recorded. Man. It's a long time, Grace.
It is. Ne'er did I feel as old as 801 podcasts.
Yes. When I met you, you were but a young single woman.
Just a wee lass.
Just a wee lass, you know. Yeah, cutting her teeth in her new government job in Washington, D.C. And, lo, the many years have passed.
Here we are, 7 jobs later, but I'm still here.
Well, you know, you just have gotten younger looking and more beautiful. I've gotten older, fatter, we're more wrinkled. You know, it's hell being me.
That's not true.
Oh,
you look the same as you did at day one.
I wish. So, yeah, you know, I thought, Grace, it might be kind of fun. So if you guys were listening last week, that was podcast 800. And so we've had 800 podcasts that we've done. And I thought I do get a lot of emails because we have a lot of new listeners, and even our Patreon supporters are newer to the sport. You know, maybe they've been watching since 2018 or
we've been doing this since the Stone Age.
Yes.
So it is believable that there are people that have only joined us in the Paleolithic age and don't have all the inside information.
I know. And then we got Paul in at the Cambrian explosion. Remember, we got him in it. It's crazy, you know?
Exactly.
Oh, my gosh.
Still those wrinkles.
I know. It's crazy. So anyway, we've got a lot of new listeners, too. And so I thought I'd take a minute for you veterans out there who've been listening since single or double digits. Yeah, you'll remember some of these things. But
stroll down memory lane.
Yeah, a little stroll down memory lane. But, you know, I would be remiss in not taking at the top of this podcast a huge thank you to all of our listeners and expressly to our Patreon supporters, because we couldn't and wouldn't do this podcast if it wasn't for all the wonderful Patreon supporters that we have. We reached our 800th episode of our podcast last week. It's been quite a journey. And I thought Grace and I would just share a few of our thoughts about that milestone. If you'll indulge us, I thought we would just share a couple thoughts. So 17 years ago, for you newer to the podcast, 17 years ago, I started this website. At the time, it was called Formula1blog.com. And in 2007, we decided to start doing a podcast. And so that seemed like all the rage, and why not? And, you know, we thought that might be fun. So we also did a lot of interviews of some of the sport's biggest personalities. And those were in a podcast series called F1B Downshift. Now it's relabeled TPF Downshift. And there were about 80 of those episodes that I really, really enjoyed. A lot of Steve Matchett is a dear friend of ours. And one of my favorite ones, oddly enough, is Brian Redman. I just thoroughly enjoyed that. Anyway, if you consider, though, I mean, just thinking about numbers, 800 podcasts, and then you've got all the 80 Downshift episodes, just in sheer episodes and numbers, that's like over 3,000 hours or more that we've all spent, putting all these together. And Grace and Paul have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours themselves.
Pretending that we read the notes you sent us? Yes. Yeah, right. Hundreds and hundreds of hours.
Hundreds and hundreds of hours.
For sure.
Yeah. Yep. And so, yeah, it's been a labor of love, and it's a lot of time. And, you know, we've been creating content for that long. We even fought that whole trademark battle using the word Formula One in our name, hence
right.
the change to the Parc Fermé several years ago. And then we've had, FIA media credentials. We've been in the garage and paddock, several races, and, met a lot of fantastic people along the way in the paddock, not only team members and drivers, of course, and team bosses, but the mechanics, people at the ancillary companies that support those Formula One teams, like Pirelli and Shell and those kind of things. Met a lot of great people there. And to be really honest with you, I've met a lot of fantastic F1 journalists along the way that are just terrific people, very connected and got a lot of respect. And then we've hosted the podcast on several different platforms over the years. When you have this many and time goes on and you have to move platforms and pricing, to try to afford that. And the last I recall, we were on one place and we, at that point, had on that platform alone, we had done over 6 million downloads. And then when we changed to a different platform more recently, a few years ago, we did another 2 million there. And now we've changed again to Spreaker, which is a new platform for us. We're off to a great start there already. And I would imagine we're probably somewhere in that 9-10 million downloads since we began the podcast in total, which, may or may not be a great number, but it is what it is for us. And we're excited about that.
I try not to think about that.
It's a lot of downloads. Yeah, it is for, to me, I don't know, to other, bigger podcasts, it's not, but.
I always think of the person that wrote us the one time was like, oh, I'm learning English from listening to your podcast. And suddenly I was like, I got to sit up straight and speak in better grammatical sentence structure.
I know. She was a delightful person.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it makes sense.
Oh my gosh, don't learn English from Grace and I. Trust me.
Right. It was just like, whoa, I need to think about that more. So I try not to think about that stuff. Kind of freaks me out sometimes.
Yeah,
but
she
it's pretty
was
impressive.
Delightful. Wonderful person. I met her in Austin and she was delightful.
Good. Yeah. It's just you think, it's just you and I doing this, or you, me, and Paul, whoever, and you do forget that, people out there do listen to this, and that I find that people will say things to me like, oh, how's Ziggy doing? Or something like, I'm like, why do you, because I talk about my cats all the time, right? Like, of course, you know the names of my cats, right? So sometimes I forget that, it's not just you and me at a bar talking about things, that there are a million people listening to this as well.
I know it's nuts. And I was thinking about that over the weekend. It was my birthday on Saturday. And so I was trying to do absolutely nothing, and
it was 2 days ago.
Yeah, I know.
It's better when the podcast falls the day before your birthday.
Yeah,
and then it's tomorrow works.
It's tomorrow.
It's 2 weeks. It was 2 days ago.
It's 2 days ago. And I was thinking about all the listening and all the kind of a lot of the new emails that we're getting from new listeners was just, it's terrific and humbling. The other thing about our I've had people ask me, you've been doing this a long time. Why aren't you, a lot bigger? There's other podcasts that are a lot bigger. And there are, and that's great. And we applaud them, for having a big footprint on the industry. But, our thing, and I'm not insinuating they've done anything untoward. I'm just saying we kind of set out a long time ago, and this would have been in the nascent era of podcasts in 2005, 6, 7, right?
We were creating content before content creator was a thing. Yes.
Yes, and influencer was a thing and all that,
and
right?
We still had to get our news from Autosport that came from England like 3 weeks late.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We had to hunt and peck, right? And so the thing about it is, though, we've always deployed a white hat strategy. We've never paid for a review of our podcast where you go and you pay people and you get, 1,000 positive reviews. We've never done that. Every single review on Apple, good or bad, is all organic. We've never paid for a review. We have never bought a link. Or link baiting. We've never taken money for paid content. I get emails all the time. Hey, would you do, paid content? And, we write about car insurance and, not interested. We've never done that. We've never paid for any social media promotion, like social, bumping our stories. None of that. Never paid for social media promotion or ads. Never done that. We've never played the SEO game. I really don't even worry about SEO. I don't go in and, put in SEO keywords and titles and really work the system. I don't have a lot of time because I have a day job. So I don't have time to do any of that stuff. But there's nothing artificial about our growth. It's been basically a white hat strategy, all blood, sweat, and tears. And there's a little doubt that we've never grown to what we probably should have, much to our own detriment over the years. But we're fine with that. I mean, I don't look back and regret on our 800 episodes and think, gosh, there were so many things when I was going through some old files that I have. There's so many things that we were doing back then, Grace, that were like, I don't mean this arrogantly, but sort of ahead of our time. There were concepts and promotions and things that we were doing back in 2009, 2010, 12, those kind of things that now you start to see it'll pop up in some content and everybody just is great. And it's like, yeah, we did that in 2012, but the deal is nobody was watching back in 2012. So when we were doing it, we were, it was the sound of one hand clapping. So more power to everyone else for doing great content and great stuff. And you guys timed it perfectly. You really did. And that's great. We were out of stink. But I think the reason, though, that we've been around so long, while other podcasts have now come and just dwarfed us in exposure, brand awareness, is really because all of us have day jobs at the end of the day, and none of us wanted anything to be artificial. And I don't mean that other podcasts are. I'm just saying, in order for us to achieve any sort of growth potential, we would have to deploy some strategies that I think would be relatively artificial. And back in 2007, we said we wanted our podcast to really be like two friends having a beer and talking about the sport we love. And we invited all of you, or the listeners, to join us at the table and have a beer and have that discussion. And I like to think that it's always had that flavor to it. And it's always kind of been that way. I remember the first quote negative review that our podcast had, is like the first, second, fifth review.
Yeah, right. Real early on.
Was something along the lines that, yeah, it's okay. And it's what was something about it's lightly entertaining and occasionally insightful.
It's always entertaining and occasionally insightful.
That's it. It's always entertaining and occasionally insightful. So
Yeah.
I don't even know who that person was that left that review, but bless you, because occasionally
Perfectly.
insightful has become our tagline
Yeah.
for years now, that we're only occasionally insightful.
And I think that's what I bring to every interaction. So
Occasionally,
Yeah.
me too.
But you always walk away having a good time. It was always fun.
Yeah. That's the point. We've never pretended that we're a news outlet. I know when blogs first started, there was this sort of penchant to create blogs, and you had your standard news sites, and then these blogs popped up, and they were really pitching themselves as competitive news outlets for Formula One news. And we never did that, not because we were smart or were better or anything like that. We just never did that because our sort of milieu was always a fan's view of the sport. It was never us trying to be professional F1 journalists. Our argument is that the world has a lot of fantastic, real F1 journalists that are paid to do that, and they're fantastic. All we do is amplify the stories and share our opinions about it, and that's why our tagline was the Journal of F1 Opinion. And so, we've never put ourselves out there as a news outlet. We've created, although I will say we've created tons of original content over the years, but we've always paid homage to real reporters in F1 and their outlets that they write for. I think they're fantastic, and we couldn't do what we do without them. We started, like I said, with one simple goal, and that goal was to be a safe harbor for new and veteran fans to engage each other and talk about the sport without veterans lording over the new fans and beating them up because they ask silly questions or anything like that. That's just nonsense. Our goal is try to take a group of veterans and really help new fans even get become better, more deep into the sport and a much more ardent fan, if you will, by the understanding of the sport. So that was our goal. And certainly, we've not made a dent on the sport. We haven't made a dent on the fans or created our own place in F1's machine. We've always been about the fan because, wrong or not, I believe that F1 would only succeed in America if we took America to F1, not the other way around. So our goal was to do that. And for these past 17 years, it has absolutely been our honor to create content for you. And while we take our share of beatings from fans and all that, it's really our core fans that we truly appreciate. And we couldn't do this without them and specifically our Patreon supporters. So while we've been very grateful for all the nice words about our 800th episode, and I do appreciate all the kind words, of people reaching out and congratulating on the 800th episode, I would be remiss in not saying that the real thank you is to you. Because as our listeners and longtime supporters, you're the absolute reason we do any of this. So really, to pat yourself on the back for 800 episodes, because without you folks listening, we wouldn't be doing this. So it's a huge achievement. 800. We're certainly excited about it, and I'm excited about it. And I just thought I'd share a little bit of the back history for those that are newer to the podcast that don't know our history and where we've been. But I want to elbow out some room, Grace. I've written in my note section Grace's comments. So I want to give Grace the floor, let her talk about 800 episodes and what she thinks about it.
Well, I really started because I think you nicely summarized kind of how we got here. Because again, prior to really having conversation with you, the only other person I talked to about it was like David Hobbs to the television, right? Is my point, right? And Steve Matchett and Bob Varsha, right? Like, because the races were on at 6:30 in the morning and nobody else I knew watched it. And so I just would have conversations with the three of them, like, David, you don't know what the heck you're talking about. Where are you coming up with this stuff? Because who else was I talking to? So I know for me, it's always been a great community, to talk to people. I've made friends, people that, I talk to on a regular basis through the show. And so I just really appreciate all the love and support for the pod. And even the occasional, like, hey, Grace, could you not be so close to the microphone? I'm doing the best I can here, people. Comments that I get, but it's been great, and I still can't believe. I mean, I can because I literally remember doing this, but 17 years ago. But that it seems like yesterday, which is how time works. But so as I started kind of ruminating on 800 years, what 800 years? Jeez, it feels like that. 800 podcasts. What I always think about are kind of the things that just sort of organically became funny. Because I think that is really what bonds friends or significant others or anything like these, just random things that would come up that would pop into our heads and they would be hilarious for some reason. And so the first one I thought of is, of course, Pat Fry and the Magic 8 Ball, since Pat Fry has shown up again. So he used to be at Honda, which I always like calling Team Barf 1 because that was the greatest team name ever, right? So it was challenged. You remember the spiker before it was Team MF1.
Yes. It was like you MFer MF1. Yeah. But Barf 1 is just the best.
Yeah. So they were BAR, right, which was their cigarette sponsor. So they were the British American Racing, and so they were Team BAR F1. But I prefer Team Barf 1, which is much funnier. And but Pat Fry became their team principal, and we were always like, who's making these decisions? I guess kind of like how people feel about Ferrari in the current movement, but you just feel like, Pat Fry, what are you talking about? And it was just so we would joke that he's just shake, 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 pit the number 2 car, right? That he must be using a Magic 8 Ball to make his decisions because we couldn't figure it out. And so now the fact that he's shown up at Aston Martin is just, does he still have the Magic 8 Ball? Did he lend it to Bonato? I don't know where the Magic 8 Ball is, but that was,
shake, 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 ask Charles.
Yeah, right. Question, which I will say, we do that now all the time at my house. I don't know if you guys do, but I'll be like, Flip, what do you want to do for dinner? Question. I I mean, I understand that it's because like you don't always get like radios aren't clear, right? It's the same thing truckers. It's why you say like 10-4 and stuff. Like,
Yeah,
so
right.
it's clear that I
Roger.
started and ended my comment. But so they say question at the end, but it was just really funny that they just kept playing that radio coverage of them going, do you want to do plan C? Question.
Yeah.
So, you know, do you want to go for a walk outside? Question. It never stopped being, it will never stop being funny. But so there was that. I thought a recent one that made me laugh was when we talked about Gene Haas being a part of the CNC Music Factory and said, because I just love the visual of Gene Haas as a member of CNC Music Factory. It was just hilarious to me.
Awesome.
So that happened. Let's see, what else did I have? Oh, so this was one that recently, so I have one of our old mugs, just like all the t-shirts I have, right? I buy all our swag, but I have one of our old mugs and it has hashtag just the wind on it.
Yeah.
And so that, because that was a big inside gag. And so we were watching, you know, random YouTube clips, and they started talking about, it was a WTF1 clip, you know, hat tip, right? Not my clip. But anyway, and they were talking about when Fernando Alonso got electrocuted in 2015. And I just started laughing, and Flip's like, what are you laughing about? I'm like, this is just the wind. This is why that hashtag is on our mugs, is because of this incident. But he also, a newer fan, was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So in 2015, they were at Catalunya. It was the preseason, you know, testing. And for some unknown reason, Fernando Alonso was whisked off in a helicopter to the hospital. And so pre-testing, just like now, you know, there's like 4 journalists there. You know what I mean? Like nobody's there. There's no cameras there. Nobody's covering it. It's just like cold and rainy and people are driving cars around, maybe. Unless you're Williams, we just hope you show up, right?
Right.
So, but all of a sudden everybody's like, where's Fernando going? And so Ron Dennis, I think that's the thing too, is that like Flip has never really experienced Ron Dennis and his full Ron Dennis-ness.
Yeah, those
and
are
I'm
the
like,
best.
I was like, Bill Belichick is kind of the closest, kind of like just looks at you and deadpans these things, and you're just like, what? And so he said that it was just the wind. It was not random. It was like a uncontrolled gust of wind in turn 3 at Catalunya. And it was just like, really? You sent him to the hospital because of that? So it turns out that he was electrocuted, right? So, or that's the prevailing theory. I don't know that anybody actually knows. But anyway, so then hashtag just the wind became a thing everywhere. Like, oh, somebody spun out at Monza, just the wind. There's no wind at Monza, right? But whatever, it doesn't matter. It just became like, so just the wind is always a classic.
Yeah, then we ran that. It became like some of, you know, similar when everybody says, oh, it must have been Marcus hit me, you know.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just the wind, right?
Just
and
wind,
so
hashtag just the wind.
It was great. And it was just sort of like a default for everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, he didn't have a good race, just the wind, right? So, but it was classic, like Ron Dennis, who could say like, who was a master of like 700 words, and you'd go, what did he didn't say anything, right? Like, I learned nothing.
The inventor of the word salad. Wow.
Yes. But it sounded really good. And it was these like $1 million words. And, and we were just like, and I just imagine that if I was a journalist, you'd just walk away and I'd be like, I have nothing to write about.
Yeah.
What did he just say? Nothing. Right. Yeah. Classic coach speak, right? Like that's really, really the skill. I thought, I feel like we can't pass up. There are several podcasts that I always think kind of like stick out in my mind as like classic podcasts. One was what I like to refer to as the Glassware podcast, where we thought it would be hilarious because it was Autosport, right, that had done the post-race podcast. So if you watch Ted's Notebook, you know, like he's always walking around and they're like, you know, tearing stuff up. And so they're clearly like in somebody's, you know, the like hospitality area, and they're cleaning up. And so all you hear is that this glass is clinking. And so we thought it would be hilarious. And so Todd just found this like ambient glassware, you know, clinking like you're at a bar.
It was ambient restaurant noise.
People hated it. We thought, oh, this is great. This is going to be gold. People are going to think it's so funny. People hated it. And we're like, never do that again.
I know. Yeah. It was the podcast that, I don't know if it was BBC's maybe.
Oh, maybe it was BBC.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of them. It's the one that Jenny Gow's on now. But anyway, Yeah, and it was always funny because they would record the podcast after the race, and
Right.
so they'd run down to Williams like eatery, and you'd hear all this chinaware and silverware and flatware and
Yeah.
everything banging around, glasses banging around in the background, and
Right.
people talking in the background, and that was every single podcast they did. That's what you heard. So
Yeah.
you're always listening to them talk over this den of just people in an
Clanging.
eatery sort. Yeah. So we just thought it'd be funny. I found that ambient noise. I put it in the background at a lower volume, and it sounded like we were, in the, doing the same thing, sitting in the somebody's garage or whatever. And we did that, and people got all pissed off at it.
I thought it was going to be solid gold. I just remember
Just the joke, because they thought we were trying to make it sound like we were at the race.
no, it was funny.
You're trying to, you're lying. You're saying you're at the race. No, we're not at the race. Of course not.
Clearly not at the race, right? But
Right.
I was in my basement, I just thought it was just like that joke just fell flat.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
There's the episode, the infamous re-recorded from a cave,
Yes.
where our audio was terrible. It was like episode 3.
Yeah.
And then the one that will forever always stick out in my mind is that, so I still am, although I have no time to watch it, but a WRC fan, right? But you also have to go with, imagine if you will, back in the olden days, 17 years ago, everything was print media. Like you would watch it, but we didn't have YouTube. We didn't have all this
Right.
content that now you can just look stuff up and watch it, right?
Yeah.
If you didn't catch that event live with your VCR tape at 2 a.m, you didn't get to watch the WRC race, right? There was no
Right.
watch it later on stream, right? You had to watch it live. That was it. Those were your only options. And so I'm like, Todd, it's off season. WRC starts early. It starts in the end of January. F1 doesn't start, Vroom. Oh, that's another
Right.
good inside run, right? The off season used to be so much longer back then. Can I just do WRC, right? World Rally
Yeah.
Champion episode? And I was like, yeah, Grace, that's a good
Yeah,
idea.
let's do it.
Do some work, do that. Well, halfway through the show, I realized that I don't know how to pronounce literally 90% of the drivers because I've watched it, but I haven't heard their names and I have no way of gaining that information. So we used to record them with cameras on, but we didn't record the video. So
Right.
I'm pretty sure that I'm oh yeah, Todd, haha, oh my God, I'm screwed. I'm sure it was on my face when I realized that I only knew how to pronounce Sebastian Loeb's name.
Right.
And then I had a bunch of Norwegian, Scandinavian, Finnish names that
Yeah.
I've never actually heard said out loud.
I think you crashed and burned on Jari Matti Lapsala.
Yeah, see, right? It was I'm oh boy, this is going to be, but you just have, the show's got to go on. I was really stoked for doing this episode and I did a lot of research on it but I didn't know how to actually pronounce any of the names. And
It was funny.
I don't speak any of those languages, so that was great. But that one always stuck out to me. That was just well,
Yeah.
I tried.
Yeah. I remember when we got accused of having that noise in the background, and we were accused of trying to make it sound like we were at the race, and we were like, we're so not at the race. There's no part of this podcast suggests that we are. So then we thought it would be funny to find the closest racetrack to the actual Grand Prix,
Right.
put that noise in, and then we would come to the intro. We're coming to you live from, Brands Hatch.
Right. Some go-kart track or something. Right.
Yeah, it was some little go-kart track or something, some little track that was close to whatever, in the same country anyway. And, and talk about that track and everybody's like, what the hell are you talking about?
We don't know. I mean, it was a different time, people.
It was a different time.
I think that there's so many moments. I think of the Stoffel Van Dorn Burger King of recent.
The McDonald's, yes. Yeah,
See,
McDonald's.
I thought it was a Burger King.
Yes. The portrait. Yes.
Yes, right. So, I think that there are these things that kind of organically have developed that always are what stick with me, and that when people either ask about them or somebody brings them up, right? I always like when somebody's long time, first time, I've been listening since the cave episode. I'm like, well, that was episode 5. So you've been listening for a long time,
And that kind of goes with the soundboard for Williams, right? That's Williams, Total Wolf, right?
Right.
It's Lance.
I want it now. What's the matter with
Right?
those twats
And
down there?
kind of goes with that. You know,
Right.
there's certain sounds. It's always funny. People, you know, on social media, they'll parrot like a phrase from the soundboard that I think is kind of
Right.
fun. And I usually get a lot of suggestions. People say, "Oh, dude," they'll send me a link and they'll say, "You got to put this on the soundboard." You know.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I don't get my clips don't get on the soundboard either, people. So
Yeah. Oh, I got a lot of sounds on there. You know, they're hard to see.
yeah, well, so I just think that those have been some of my like off the top of my head favorites. I think
Yeah.
if other people have favorites, I would love to hear those too.
I would
because,
too. Yeah.
Sometimes people bring things up and I'm like, like this will happen. Tomorrow morning, somebody will be like, Grace, when you said this, I'll be like, I didn't even remember I said that. But that is pretty
I
funny.
know.
I'm glad I said that, right?
I
Because it
know.
kind of like you do the show and you slate is
Yeah.
clean. But
Oh, it's funny because the last podcast, I didn't remember talking about it. I just kind of, it was mind vomit. It just kind of came out. I brought up the new FIA president, and I was talking about the guy's like everywhere, you know?
yeah.
And I would just went on a rant of all the places he's at. And I had several people email me, said, "Oh my gosh, that was hilarious." And one listener from Australia said, "Dude, that was hilarious. We call that the Eddie Everywhere impact." And
Yes.
that was hilarious. But yeah, it's funny where these things take a life of their own. And a lot
Right.
of times they don't take a life of it. It's not like they take a life of their own because, you know, Grace and I just think they're funny because there's things that we do because we think they're funny. We're going to do them. But they kind of take the life of their own when the listeners engage with it, you know? And like there's so many times that something will happen and somebody will tweet,
Not good enough, damn it! Not good
you
enough!
know, and
That's right. Right.
you know, things take a life of their own, and that's the fun of it is you guys engaging and engaging us with that. It takes a life of its own. It's what creates the community and the bond that we all have, and that's, you know, that's what makes us all friends around the table at the pub drinking a beer talking about F1. It's these common things and these things we all find funny, and that shared sort of unified view of Formula One, and it makes it funny. And some people I absolutely annoy the heck out of, and I get it. It's perfectly okay. But other people, we just kind of resonate, and same for you. And that's what makes it fun.
I don't know what you're talking about, Todd. Everybody likes me, but you know,
Well, true. Yeah, true.
it's not true. I was also thinking too, there was always the rear facing camera debacle where I used the same joke at the top of the show and at the end of the show. We were I thought it was such a great joke. I repeated myself, which now I have
Right.
to take paper notes, right? So that I can cross things off because it's like, oh, I said that. I made that joke. I already made that comment. But it was back. It's a picture I use all the time, but it's from right before Spygate. But it's a picture of Alonso and Lewis with a phone, a flip phone, because that was the height of technology back then. And
Yeah.
they were holding this flip phone like this because there weren't rear-facing cameras back then. And Alonso taking a picture of themselves. And I just made some reference to, like, you know, the Vodafone and Pedro de la Rosa, because he was their test driver and he's the other person involved in Spygate at the beginning. And then I made the same joke at the end. And of course, Todd's on the camera going, "Oh, you already said that." And I'm like, "Wow, I just said it again. And we're just going to have to go with it."
Just in case you missed it the first time.
In case you were, you know, at a red light or somebody cut you off or, you know, you weren't paying attention. So good I said it twice. So that's when I had to start like writing things down because
Right.
clearly my memory in an hour and a half
Right.
isn't good enough to remember I
Right.
already told that joke.
Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah.
It's been I think absolutely. I think I know I gave people like telling me about bad stuff, but I think actually, you know, I have learned a lot. This isn't something, if you had asked me 18 years ago, did I think I'd be doing a pod every week or every other week or whatever?
Yeah.
No, I certainly didn't. I think for a long time, I think back then it was weird too. Like now, if I told people, "Oh yeah, I do a podcast," people are like, "Oh yeah, everybody does a podcast." But again, back then, people are like, "You do what? And you've never met the
Exactly.
guy? What?" You know,
Yeah.
It was just like, I mean, by now Todd and I have met
Yes,
several
we've
times,
met,
but
yes.
we did for like three to 5 years or something without ever
Yeah.
actually meeting face to face in person. Which again,
Right.
now not so weird. Back then, very weird. And
Yeah.
then people were like,
Yeah.
"Who is this guy?" You know, like, is he
Yeah.
catfishing you? Even though catfishing as a term didn't exist back then, but you know, like, who who is this guy really?
Right.
I'm like, yeah, he's a real person. I've met him. They're like, you do what? So
Yeah.
I think that is also really interesting that now, I do a pod and nobody cares and it's not
I
embarrassing
know.
and I don't have to explain it. But back
Yeah.
then,
Everybody does a podcast now. You know?
yeah, it was just such a rare,
And it is kind of funny because like in my day job, and somebody would say, like one of my colleagues would say, well, he does a podcast, and they're like, oh yeah, you getting into the podcast too? And I said, well, yeah, 800 episodes later,
yeah, I mean, maybe.
doing it since '07, so yeah, I kind of got into it.
Yeah, we're just new to this, but yeah, I do think that it used to be something that I wouldn't tell people about, and now it's just like, oh yeah, Monday
Yeah,
nights,
right.
I got to do the pod. I can't hang
Right.
out.
That's so true.
It's fine. So
It's been a fun journey, and I've enjoyed it all. And there's so many people that ask me, why in the world haven't you got it monetized? And why in the world would you spend all that time doing something that's not monetized? And I think the simple answer for me is I love the sport. I love the sport. And I love talking to you and Paul about the sport. And I love talking to the listeners. And the more they engage on our website, the more opinions they share or on our social media and everything, it's just, it's even better. And
yeah, absolutely.
because I love hearing our listeners' opinions on it, even if they disagree, and that's totally fine. We know the rule at TPF. It's share your opinion, just do it decorum and civility, right? No personal attacks, and we can disagree all along, but they're great listeners. We're never going to agree on everything, and I love that. And I love the sport. We've been carrying water for Formula One for a long time. And that's why. And it all started with this. Right here.
That's right. I wasn't watching back then.
And this is the original one that I had as a little boy. My mom and dad got me this when I was a little boy. And that's the car that got me into Formula One. And I've been a fan ever since. So there you go. Long story. Well, let's talk about the number 800, shall we?
Okay.
That's kind of fun. So I was thinking, hey, before we get into some news, I was just kind of poking around thinking about the number 800. It's an interesting number. So and I thought, first of all, what was the 800th Formula One race? Huh? Now, unless you're Sean, Statman,
Yeah, right.
you'll instantly know that. But unless you're him, you may not know that. The 800th F1 race was its very first night race. That's right. It was in Singapore in 2008. And yes, we covered that race, of course.
We did.
Fernando Alonso won that race in his underperforming Renault, while his teammate, Nelson Piquet Jr., or as Grace called Junior,
Because there was already a junior. Dale Earnhardt Jr. is already junior, so he was
He's
junior.
So he's junior. So he crashed, and it wasn't until later that we learned that the first night race was actually won by purposely asking Nelson Piquet Jr. to crash his Renault right after Alonso had boxed, and that handed Alonso the win. Now, none of this came out until the team sort of looked like they weren't going to renew Piquet Jr.'s deal, and then all of a sudden this came out, and it was a huge kerfuffle. And if you're new to Formula One, you don't know much about that, look up 2008 Singapore Grand Prix. It was a complete debacle. The incident saw team boss Flavio Briatore, that's like the Christian Horner Total Wolf, team boss Flavio Briatore, and the chief technical boss, Pat Simmons, banned from the sport. Only later, folks, Pat returned and eventually took the role as chief technical officer of Formula One, heading the 2022 new car regulations. That's right. The regulations of the cars that you're enjoying right now and closer racing and all that stuff. Pat Simmons, the guy who was banned from Formula One for being involved in Crashgate at the 800th Grand Prix. That guy is the guy that designed the cars you're looking at this year. Thankfully, the new fans of F1 with their mobocracy outrage weren't around then with social media to ensure that Pat never held another job again in his life, not even at a Quickie Mart in Melbourne. You can see that, can't you? Welcome to Quickie Mart. I've got some Foster's on sale and the Vegemite sandwiches in the cooler, mate.
They were still around. They just didn't have social media.
Yeah, they didn't have social media, right, to cancel him, right?
Right.
So,
I don't
there you
know.
go. So I could see Pat as a operator of a
I
company.
mean, to be fair, he did deserve some form of cancellation.
Well, yeah, and Flavio's still banned, but Flavio's been in the paddock because he still
Yes.
manages Alonso and some other people. But
Of course he does, you
but
know.
it doesn't work in F1. Yeah,
No, that's right. But he still occasionally shows up, you know.
I know he'll show up, and people see him and they'll go,
Jesus Christ.
"That's Flavio Briatore."
He'll say some stuff. You're hoping they subtitle it like they do the
Yeah,
radio,
you
right?
gotta
like,
subtitle him. Yeah,
what?
hard to
I don't know.
understand.
That guy has never. Could you imagine having to listen to that over the radio? I have no idea. Like, question is the only thing you'd hear, right? Like,
I know.
what?
And
What
he had
just
that
happened?
monster yacht that
Yes.
he owned. And then it got impounded for lack of payment of taxes. And Bernie just bought it at auction for like a steal. Like 2 or 3 months ago.
And I'm sure he did it just out of spite. He probably doesn't want
No, he
or
didn't.
need a yacht, but that's
No.
that's what I would do if I had that's just pettiness transacting on a whole nother level, right? But I'm sure he was just like, oh, I want that. I don't need it. I'm just gonna leave it on whatever the boat version of Blocks is and put it in my front yard, right? Just gonna
Right.
dry dock that. I'm never
Right.
gonna run it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be petty.
Yeah. So
That's what I would do.
So that was the 800th Grand Prix. I just thought that was an interesting little trivia bit. What was interesting about the Brazilian Grand Prix in 2016, Grace? Well, that would happen to be in 2016, Grace's team, McLaren, that was their 800th Grand Prix. And Fernando Alonso came in 10th for him, while Jenson Button was down in 16th. It was totally a race to forget for McLaren.
Right?
But Fernando was there and came in 10th. So there you go. So that was the 800th Grand Prix for McLaren. Now, what was so interesting? Does anyone remember the 2010 Turkish Grand Prix?
Was that the one that Lewis Hamilton flew in on? Because that's the only one I remember.
Oh, that was brilliant. That was awesome. That may have been right around that time.
Yeah, but well, anyway, I don't want people to think I forgot that. That is like
No,
that is
no.
gem worthy.
Oh, that is priceless.
Forever.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Ferrari doesn't remember, but it was Ferrari, my team's, it was Ferrari's 800th Grand Prix back in 2010, the Turkish Grand Prix. And despite having a massive 800 decal on the side of their car, the team had a forgettable race with Fernando Alonso, that's right, coming in 8th and Felipe Massa in 7th. So you had Alonso involved in, you see it in a theme here, folks. Fernando was involved in the 800th F1 race in Singapore. He was involved in that. He was at McLaren for their 800th race. He was at Ferrari for their 800th race. He scored his 800th point in F1 in 2010 as well. And I think Williams may be getting close to their 800th Grand Prix. So we need to get Fernando over there after
Right, just
Martin, right?
right, just to make it nice.
Right. It's
I don't know.
Williams, right?
Right. That Fernando guy, he's everywhere.
He's everywhere. He's like the FIA president. You know,
What was
he's
that?
everywhere.
And Eddie about what did the Australians call that?
Eddie everywhere.
Eddie everywhere. That's I'm
Yeah.
going to write that down because
Yeah.
that's pretty good. I
It is
definitely
Yeah.
Eddie everywhere.
Yeah. So anyway, that's and then 800 drivers. We're almost there actually. As of 2022, the Italian Grand Prix, there has been 772 Formula 1 drivers from 41 different nationalities who have raced at least one of the 1,073 FIA World Championship races since the first such event in 1950 at the British Grand Prix. So we're getting awful close to 800 drivers in Formula 1 too. So
Oh, I guess it
how
can't be
about
Fernando Alonso, huh?
that? Yeah, it's a shame.
Ugh.
Unless he retires and comes back, you know.
Which could happen. He could do a
I
Kimi
wouldn't put it
Räikkönen.
past him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's done it before, right? But just go do a year in trucks
Yeah.
and come back.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
So anyway, just a little fun with the number 800 for you. Hope you
All right.
enjoyed that little trip down trivia lane. So, all right, let's talk about a couple news stories before we bail out of any podcast. First up, really, the news this whole week has been AlphaTauri and Colton Herta. So
Yeah.
it seems now that AlphaTauri has moved kind of away from the Colton Herta thing. The FIA super license is going to prevent Colton Herta from getting his shot at F1, replacing Pierre Gasly, who was trying to get over to Alpine. There's now talk that possibly Nick de Vries was in speaking to Helmut Marko Helmut. So, oh, and by the way, so this goes way back. The reason we say Helmut Marko Helmut, and his new soundbite is this:
Goodbye, good luck, and good riddance.
So that is the voice of the character from the old Rankin and Bass. It's Meisterburger. And many, many years ago, when Helmut Marko kind of got in and he was kind of draconian and we were laughing, and it was like, yeah, this guy's like, he reminds me of Meisterburger, and he's like, no toys, and so from that day on, for years now, we always refer to him as Helmut Marko Helmut. It's a dumb joke, but it's been in the podcast forever. So there you go.
But it's our dumb joke.
It's our dumb joke, dang it. So anyway, apparently maybe Nick de Vries was seen over chatting with Helmut Marko about a possible fill-in there, and we know he has the super license.
Who didn't Nick de Vries chat with again, first of all, that weekend? Also, did you see that this total non sequitur? Did you see the video where he couldn't get himself out of the car?
Mm-hmm.
I laughed. I thought that was hilarious. Poor kid.
Yeah.
And then I love it because at first it's like, oh, Pierre Gasly's going to come help him. Nope. Not at all. Pierre Gasly's just like, great race. You did a great job. And he's just like, my arms are broke. The poor kid.
Help me.
Help. Yeah. So
I did see that.
I just thought,
ow,
yeah. Like, take that, Lewis Hamilton. I just thought it was really,
right.
like, could somebody come get me? It was just so like, oh, poor guy,
It was. So, so this prompted Alexander Rossi, a former F1 driver, now IndyCar driver.
Yes.
And, he came out in the press and he said, hey, he was kind of fed up with everything that was going on around this issue. And here's what Alexander said. He said, quote, we all agree Colton has the talent and capability to be an F1. That's also great. And he should get that opportunity if it's offered him, period. Motorsport still remains as the most high profile sport in the world where money can outweigh talent. What is disappointing, and in my opinion, the fundamental problem is that the sporting element so often took a back seat to the business side, that there had to be a method to put in place in order for certain teams to stop taking drivers solely based on their financial backing. Ultimately, these past decisions, whether out of greed or necessity, is what cost Colton the opportunity to make the decision for himself as to if he wanted to alter a career path and race in Formula One. No, not the points on a license, end quote. So, I thought that was, it was an a very profound position for Alexander to take.
And it's what Colin Herta can't say.
It is. Yes.
Right? He can't say,
yes,
this is BS. You guys change the rules all the time, right?
Yep.
If you really wanted me, you'd just and the rules would be whatever, and I'd have a super license. So let's not act like today you want to follow the rules, right? And so I thought it was really poignant of Rossi to say something, because of course Herta can't say that. Right.
And I don't think it's a ham-fisted, indictment of the FIA. I just think he's, from his perspective, and look, he's been there. He was there, and he had to pay to play, right? So he knows it firsthand, far better than I do, in what he went through. I wouldn't say that was the sole reason on the surface of it, but what he may have is that's the undertow, regardless of what the surface would tell you about why the points are there. Colton was very magnanimous about the thing. He said this, he said, quote, I can understand the FIA's position. He said this to Motorsport. He said, I just feel that IndyCar is underrepresented in the super license point structure. But from their point of view, with the current point structure, I get it. And I don't want to come as an exception, end quote. Very magnanimous statement from him. I mean, he still wants a ride there. Yeah, if possible. You know what I mean? Like, right, it's like burning bridges. He can't come in and be like, those jerk faces. Yeah, he's not going to do that.
Screwed me over.
Yeah, he's not gonna, pull a Mazepan or a Yuki on him.
Right, right. Oh,
So
right.
so now, having said all that, IndyCar does score FIA super license points, but different series are weighted differently on how many points they generate as far as getting a super license. And IndyCar gains fewer points towards a super license than, say, like F2.
Right.
Now, you might say, well, no, wait a minute. IndyCar is a full professional racing series. F2 is a feeder series. And that's true. But to be fair, F2 is the traditional feeder series for F1
Right.
and more than IndyCar has ever been. It's usually the other way around. It's F1 drivers leave F1 to go to IndyCar,
Right.
I don't mean any disrespect to IndyCar at all, but, there has been some dodgy driving in the series. But more importantly, F2 is regulated much closer to like F1 is with the rule packages and the driver standards, et cetera, than perhaps what like IndyCar is, and certainly like NASCAR or other forms of racing like WBC, right?
And they race on the same tracks. I mean, I think that's part of it too, right? Like you're gaining direct experience.
Yeah.
I think that's the end thing, right? Like that's how you'd want the weighting to be across series.
Right.
Like how much of this experience in this other series is directly relatable to your experience in F1. And the more directly relatable that experience is, it should get more points.
That's why the WC series, NASCAR series, they can gain super points from that, but they're weighted differently because those are not open wheel, not open cockpit, and so they're markedly different tracks, different kinds of things. NASCAR is traditionally is a majority oval driving, so yeah, it's a different series. Now, the whole reason this was changed was when Red Bull brought up Max Verstappen to join Toro Rosso, and there were many who felt that his limited, at that time, very limited F3 running, and the only running he had before that was karting, and they felt that that was not enough, that he was too young to be in the series with not enough experience, and so I think the FIA at the time, now he has proven to be an incredible talent, but I even remember us talking about at that time, I felt like too young. He literally went, and Kimi Räikkönen was very similar. Literally went from karts to a few races in Formula 3 and then into F1. Now, kudos to Red Bull for seeing the talent, but boy, that's awful young, right? So then they changed the rules, and it was really about that. Now, that's my surface view of it. Now, when you juxtapose that with what Alexander was saying, I think he's saying that the impetus of bringing a young guy like Max in or Kimi in is what he was saying is the real undertow and reason. And whether out of greed or necessity, meaning the teams are greedy and they want all that money that these young drivers are bringing, or in the case of like Williams, Minardi, Jordan, they definitely need that money to keep the team going out of necessity. That's why they were bringing these young drivers in that had a lot of money, younger and younger. So,
yeah, you would hope that part of any rulemaking body is to protect you from yourself, right?
Yeah, right.
Speed limits exist. This is a generic because they're too low. But anyway, speed limits exist because they're trying to protect us from ourselves, right? That the idea is that not everybody can drive that fast and we're going to have a lot of accidents. Everybody drives that fast. So we're going to keep the speed limit at 55, 65, and that reduces the amount of accidents we have. So you would hope that that's the only reason that they are acting in the way they are. But I agree. I don't necessarily believe that, but that should be what they're doing.
Yeah. So anyway, I hope that answers your question, Mr. Drury. Next up, I thought this was an interesting story. Won't spend a lot of time on it, but Max has been critical of Drive to Survive's overhyped drama and creative liberties in the past season. So his manager was keen to get a better understanding of what his participation would look like. His manager said this year, Max wants to participate in the series, but logically, we want to know what the storyline will look like. what the storyline will be and what Max's contribution will be. He said this to Racing News 365. I think those are very valid questions in principle, not just about Max, but also about the other drivers, F1 drivers. In conversations with the Formula One organization, this has been discussed and it's all been decided that everyone will have more say, and that is a good thing, in my opinion. We've had good conversations about this with FOM, Formula One Management, and Netflix, and I would expect a nice contribution from Verstappen in the next season of the series. So that's what he said. He said that Netflix series has obviously been instrumental in growing Formula One's popularity in the U.S. market, but the fact is that they run what they run, and you can't really control how they portray you. Of course, I understand that drama and sensation makes for wonderful television, but I think it's also important that you know how you are portrayed. So very interesting in the sense of saying, hey, I want to know what the storyline is and how I'm fitting into the storyline and how you plan on using all of the video and sound bites of me to portray me, right? And to be honest with you think Max's camp is the only one asking these questions? I guarantee you he is not.
No, because
He's not.
I agree. I mean, the thing is that it's one thing if you're Christian Horner or if you're Toto Wolff, right? And your narrative becomes a certain thing. Like I always say that, like, I don't know Christian Horner personally, but he certainly seems to in Drive to Survive love playing the bad guy, right? Like he loves that that's his Drive to Survive narrative. But people don't come up to Christian Horner the same way they're going to Max Verstappen and say, you know, I will say jerk face. You're a jerk face, because that's your narrative in Drive to Survive. I think,
Right.
you know, we talked about last season, you know, they asked George at the first race, like, what do you think about Drive to Survive? And he kind of just was like, well, these are real people to me.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's the thing, right? Like to us, this narrative is just like, oh, these are characters that they're playing, but that's really George and that's really Max Verstappen. And that whatever Drive to Survive puts out there, it's one thing that we as fans that watch these races and we joke about, like, was that the same Baku that you watched? Because that's not the one I watched. That's
right.
one thing. But when it's your narrative as a human being and that's what people think it's real, that is damaging to you as a person and could be dangerous, because people now think Max Verstappen is a jerk face, and he's not actually a jerk face. And that's not really a fair thing, but it makes for a good story. And they aren't reality TV stars, right? That's not what they signed up for. They're just a dude doing their job, and they're going to have people come at them, and they're going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And it's going to be because it's something in Drive to Survive.
It is, and it can sway opinion. Now, I put second, there is some legitimacy to this, and we've talked about the sensationalization or the sensationalizing nature of the past episodes, right? We've talked about that. Mm-hmm. Also, there's a real concern in that whomever the producers want to make the villain, they can do that with creative storyline arrangement, editing, and commentary that they pick. And one of my criticisms of the documentary, now these are the same people that were involved who made the documentary called Senna, which is over here on my wall. One of my criticisms of that documentary was that they made Prost the villain.
Right.
And that's not how that was.
Right.
I was there. I watched it. Prost wasn't the Snidely Whiplash to Ayrton Senna's, a good guy. That was not the case. They made it sound like Prost was constantly running Senna off the road. That's not the reality. He wasn't, and there was a book that came out later, Prost vs. Senna, that I thought was a much better even hand of the two. So my point on that is, however they want to portray it, every sport needs its villain, apparently. And so however you want to portray it, they can make that happen just by narrative, crafty things they leave in out of context. It just depends. And, I don't blame Max, Lewis, or anyone else saying, how are you planning to write me in the storyline and in what light?
Right. I mean, it's the same things that happen during the race, right?
Yeah.
We only hear certain radio clips. Somebody's sitting there going, "Oh, we should play this one. Oh, this is spicy. We should play this one. Oh, this is good." You know what I mean? Somebody's making that executive decision about what radio broadcasts we hear, right? And so I think we talked about this when Charles Leclerc crashed and he yelled, and then later he apologized. He's like, "I didn't think the radio was open." And to me, I'm like, dude, that's not your fault. That's their fault. Yeah. Right? Like, they maybe should have never played that clip, right? We should have never heard that. Somebody made an executive decision. But I think, unlike,
all we hear is Yuki F-bombing his team, but I don't know, maybe he doesn't.
Or like,
there could be radio things where he's praising the team and has a lot of love for the team. We just never hear it.
Or like Bono My Tires, right? I'm pretty sure that Lewis Hamilton and Peter Bonington talk about more things than just his tires, but that's all we heard, right? Oh, Bono My Tires, Bono My Tires, like that it became a meme in of itself because that's all they showed us. And, but I think that unlike, I think of something like somebody sees Hamilton and they learn that there are things that Lin-Manuel Miranda used poetic license, right? Like in the show, right? Because it made the story better. And he's very upfront about that. And he really kind of like struggled with like, how accurate do I have to keep the story of Hamilton? Because I realize that people are going to think that's history, even if I tell them that thing wasn't history, right? Yeah. But that's also a work of fiction. That's you go and you see that, or you watch it on TV. These are real people. Yeah, yeah. And so they don't have that same ability to say, that's not my narrative. And I think we talked a lot about the MotoGP version of Drive to Survive versus the the Formula One version of Drive to Survive, which is Drive to Survive. But I think the MotoGP version wasn't as captivating, but it was much more accurate. Yeah. And so it's like, I, as a fan of both sports, enjoyed the MotoGP one because you learned a lot. Like we talked about Maverick Vinales' story. Like there was a lot of behind the scenes you learned about from watching that, but it wasn't as like nail-bitingly dramatic as Drive to Survive was because it's closer to reality. And so I think those two series, you really see that trade-off that I don't know that you would bring in. Well, you haven't brought in MotoGP fans the way you've brought in Formula One fans. Yeah. But it's a more accurate story. Agreed.
So watch this space. Max looks like he may be teed up to do that. Let's do some Albin's Cat, shall we? All right. Hey, Alex, get better. All right. No more respiratory failure.
Yeah, I was crazy. So yeah, he might not be in Singapore. It was just like, hang out with the cats and the dogs and the horse.
Yeah, you want to get better quick. Hang out with your cats.
That's always. So like speaking of inside things. So Albon's cats. So yeah, absolutely, Alex. Yeah. Alex, get better.
All right. What do you got? Albin's cats.
So I was trying to think. There are of course, I've been off for 3 weeks, and so there are many things I have. Mm-hmm. And so I think I'm going to start with, we were talking about Colton Herta, and I think we've now in the past 3 weeks learned kind of the full picture of sort of the Alonso, Oscar, Alpine, McLaren, the timeline, because 3 weeks ago we kind of didn't have that timeline of like who said what when. But now that the court case is over, we kind of have more information about what was going on. And I just wanted to say, I think out of all of that, Otmar Schnafnauer is the person who looks the worst.
I agree.
It's not his fault, but he's the person that gets blamed, right?
I know.
He looks completely like flat-footed through this entire process again. And so it's like, can't that guy just catch a break and have a team? But I don't know. I just thought he's the biggest loser out of this whole story.
Yeah. I mean, it's the CEO, it's that Rossi guy that delivered the whole turd burger.
Yeah, right.
But Otmar's the one that's got to eat it.
Right. He went from you can only have one pope, not two, to like, I mean, I don't.
Weird.
I just was like, Otmar, there's no winning because he can't say, he's like the coach, right? He can't actually ever say what he wants to say. But certainly until the case was processed,
Yeah.
executed, whatever the right verb is. He really couldn't say anything. But like his whole leg to stand on was, I asked you when you were sitting in the simulator, are you going to be our driver? And you went, sure. I'm like, oh yeah, that's clearly not binding,
Yeah,
sir.
like,
and
yeah,
what did you want him to say in that moment? Like,
yeah.
throw the steering wheel on the ground and go, F you, I'm out of this team and I hate you guys, and like kick it over and like, you know, right? That's not going to happen either. So I don't know what, but so I just thought like, Otmar, just lay low and hope for the best season you can have.
Yeah.
At a team that yet again shows that it never fully sends, to quote Paul Tarsley. So
Right.
I just think, you know, it's Alpine. I did also want to note that Jenson Button, which race, I don't know, remember, was he at Spa? I don't remember which now race that he was at. But he was because they were talking about how, which still might happen, that Gasly could come up from AlphaTauri to take the other Alpine seat. But yet, famously, we all know that Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly don't get along. We don't know why. We just know that they don't get along. And so Jenson Button, he's like, oh, this isn't a big deal. You know, drivers, he's totally like, oh, we have our kerfuffles all the time. No, that's not what he said, but you know, like, hey, we have these arguments all the time, but at the end of the day, we just go have a drink and we're all friends again. And I love that, like, Karun Chandhook, like leaned into it and went, really, Jenson Button, like, you're friends with everybody you've had a disagreement with. And he went, I guess you're right. We don't know what they're mad at each other for. Yes, that is the standing problem here. We don't know why they're not friends. And it could just be one was faster than the other or something like that. You know, like we all pull out that clip of, you know, Leclerc and Verstappen, you know, it's an incident, you know, well, they were kids. That was a long time ago and they're over that. But we don't know why Esteban and Pierre don't talk to each other. And so I love that Jensen was just trying to like, oh, it's not a big deal. This happens all the time. And he was just kind of like, well, all right. I guess it depends. Maybe they really aren't friends. So I always like it when somebody kind of like sticks it to Jenson Button because he's like sticking it to other people. So I'll just give one more bit of Alpine related news. I'm trying to keep it topical here, right? Yeah. For once. So there's been a lot of names that have been thrown around, like Pierre Gasly, who's going to take the other Alpine seat, because now that's our obsession, right? And, you know, will it be, you know, could it be Mick Schumacher? Could it be any number of people? But the one I am, for purely selfish reasons, pulling for is Jack Doohan, who is Mick Doohan of MotoGP greatness son. Yeah, right. And so I'm like, I want Jack Doohan to be in the sport because that gives me the perfect segue from Formula One to MotoGP that I've been waiting for like 17 years, right? Like that you can be like, oh, did you see what Jack did? That's great. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Did you watch the race at Aircon? Did you see what Marc Marquez did to Flavio Briatore? Oh my gosh, that's terrible. Look at that. Did you
you see what Marquez did to Yari Latvala?
Fabio Quartararo. They have similar names. Give me a break here. Fabio Quartararo, like totally, I could just like easily segue right from Jack Doohan right into MotoGP. So I'm sure he's a great driver. People have spoken highly of him. People say maybe he needs another year in F2. That's great. I just want him in Formula One. So I always have that segue because Alpine will always be talking about, and I could just go straight from Jack right into MotoGP.
Right into MotoGP. Perfect.
Seamless. I'm ready for that. I'm good there.
I like it. All right. Well, I've got some of Todd's no shit headlines. The first one is, first headline is this: F1 teams increasingly dissatisfied with FIA president after delays in Italian Grand Prix. Really? I thought maybe you think? I think I don't know. Kind of goes with my rant about him last week. See last week's podcast to get my feelings on that one.
He's Eddie everywhere.
Oh my gosh. The next headline, F1 champ blasts Daniel Ricciardo's terrible career and says he doesn't deserve a job in 2023. I'll give you one guess on who said that.
Okay, so I have your notes, but that would have been my guess. But you'll never know that JV was totally my guess because nobody else is that sour grapes except for JV.
JV, I know. Yeah. Jacques Villeneuve for newer listeners.
Yeah, I mean, really, like, I mean, just because Ralph Schumacher doesn't have a championship, right? So
Yeah.
it has to be Jack Villeneuve.
Yeah.
Nobody else is
exactly.
that. About somebody they didn't race against. Like, you have no
Right.
reason to be salty
Right.
about him, but yet you are.
Yeah, I'm sure Dan's like,
Netflix are real buttons, aren't they?
yes,
Yeah,
Dan.
it's your
they
one
are.
quote.
Let's see. Next headline: FIA's own goal in Colton Herta case risks undoing all F1's hard work wooing the U.S. market.
What? Because he's not going to be good?
No, he's not going to be able to join Formula One. And
Oh,
they're
well,
saying, they said basically FIA, but not giving him a super license, like scoring a goal against themselves. It's an own goal. And
again, I never understand what these headlines are until I read like
yeah,
7
they're
paragraphs
British.
in, and then I'm
Yeah,
like,
they're British.
what are we talking about?
Yeah.
No,
So
I
I
don't
think you're overplaying that. I mean, I get what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, and
Yeah.
and if you're a British publication, and you looked at an American driver like Colton Herta trying to get this super license so he can get in to Formula One, and the explosive growth of Formula One in the U.S. market, very easy to draw a parallel there. Totally get that. I'm not saying that that wouldn't be exciting to Americans, but we have an American team. The sport is owned by Americans. We have another American team in Williams. Just because Colton Herta couldn't get a super license, I don't think is going to damn
No, I don't think suddenly,
the new fans in the U.S.
right? I don't think suddenly nobody's going to show up at Vegas, and it's because they all were like, I hate these people and screw
Right.
you guys and Colton Herta.
You!
You know, the thing is,
Let Colton in.
they don't know who Colton Herta is either.
That was exactly what was going to be my
So
point. They don't
you and I know who he is,
who
but they don't
Colton
watch.
is.
They don't watch IndyCar.
No, these fans aren't like they were dyed-in-the-wool IndyCar fans who just happened to get exposed during the pandemic of Formula One.
Right.
They don't watch IndyCar either. They just happen to really get hooked by Drive to Survive. And
This
so
is-
they don't know who Colton is. Much of them don't know who Colton is anyway. So
This is the only auto racing they watch.
yeah, right.
It's
the rest
not
of the time it's go Dogs, Razorbacks, it's
right,
all
whatever, right?
in ball
But
sports, right?
I think that to me is the biggest thing. And also, I think the thing that is going to crush any American hopes in the in Formula One is if Michael Andretti gets a team. So
Yeah, there
you
you go.
heard it here first, kids.
That's right.
I am still 2 thumbs down on Michael Andretti. That has
Yeah.
not changed.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm with Toto Wolff. Yeah, we could use another. Wait, who's the other team? Oh, Michael Andretti. No, we're good.
No,
full.
we're good. We're good.
We're
We're
good.
full.
Thanks.
Only manufacturers need to play. Yeah.
No, we're good.
And finally, this is just a tragic story. The headline is Heart of Stone. Quote, what you've done is obscene, end quote. F1 fans left raging as Silverstone suspend ticket sales for 2023 Grand Prix. Ticket prices apparently were super high. So in the middle of the day they launched and selling tickets, they had to pause the whole thing because the site crashed. They put out on social media, really sorry. Overwhelming response, has created issues with the website, and we've had to pause ticket sales and blah, blah, blah. But I got to digging a little more deep into that. And the ticket price, they use some place called SecureTix or something like SecureTix or something. And it's some sort of cloud-based ticketing solution. And they were using it, but the ticket prices were subject to dynamic pricing based on demand. And
Gosh.
yeah, so
Like an Uber?
yeah. So I'm sitting here
That's
thinking,
terrible.
when you launch and open it up the day for ticket sales, the demand's going to be super high. So
Huge.
automatically hits an algorithm, goes to the sky. What are you thinking? Right?
It's terrible.
If that's what happened, I just can't imagine that they would have done that. The system got jammed. They had to suspend the sales. Whoever this company is, they sucked.
And who didn't see that happening?
No, I know. And this is, this is just always, I don't know, in my mind, this is just online tech trying to be cute. But seriously,
Yes.
they need to decolonize their heads on this one. We're talking about Silverstone. We're talking about the British Grand
Yeah.
Prix.
I mean, I think so. I work in the world of surveys, and the same thing happens. So the day I send out a survey link, hey Todd, you listen to our pod. Could you fill out the survey? The biggest uptick is day one and any follow up messaging, right? So if I send you a letter, the day after I send you that letter, there'll be an uptick.
Yep.
Like this is not rocket science. That when you remind people of something that they should be doing, they go, I better do it right now, or I'm going to forget. Right.
Well, and the dynamic pricing just comes across as being incredibly greedy.
It is, but I mean, if you were going to use it really like nobody, but that would happen with anything. That would happen with concert tickets. Your most, I guess that was the point I was making. Like people who care, their response is going to be when you remind them of it. So that would be true of anything that you would put out. Day one is always going to be your hardcore fans because they've been counting down on their calendar for the day these tickets go on sale.
Oh, that's crazy.
I just think that was like dum-dums. So really you didn't see this happening?
I don't know. So apologies to all the British fans out there. That's terrible.
Yeah.
All right, finally, mailbag.
You've got mail.
I have one mail from David Bunn who asked this.
All right, hey Dave.
Hey David. He says, long-time listener, first time commenting.
Long time, first time. Welcome.
Yep. Long time, first time. He says, pardon my dog. He says, I'm a F1 fan of about 15 years. Just wondering about the engine usage in teams, just taking a new power unit just for later on in the year. I think they shouldn't be able to take a new power unit until after they hand back in all of the old units. That would certainly spice things up a bit and actually see the team manage the usage better and not just wait until they know that they won't do good on a certain track. Cheers, Dave from Australia. Speaking of Down Under, hey, Dave from Down Under, the great Southern.
Dave everywhere.
Dave everywhere. Great point. So on 3 engines for the year is not that they use one engine for the first X amount of races and it finally dies and they throw it away and then they break the seal and have another one. So it very much what you're saying, David. They treat it as a pool of available engines. Now, knowing that up until the engine freeze, there might be slight variations and innovations on that engine from the first one to the third one because of reliability issues, right? So maybe there's a certain element that they notice in the first one that in the next engine or the third engine they produce, they may make some variations and improve that reliability portion of the engine, etc. But they add those to the pool, and to your point, they know that the big power circuits are going to put a big drain on the reliability, longevity of an engine, and so they kind of hold that engine out. Those are going to be the big power circuits. They're going to run them harder. They have the other engines for the higher downforce tracks. If they had to turn in one engine every time they took a new engine, that would change it. Or if what you're suggesting is they start out with an engine and anytime they take a second engine, they turn in the first engine and that's the only engine they have, then yes, that would be a huge change to the way they go racing, the rev count that they run, the engine mapping they run, because it would have to cover varying different tracks and it'd be really, really difficult to do.
They would be like library books.
Yeah.
Right. You can only take another one after you checked in the one you had out before.
Yeah, that would be really tough on the teams for sure. So it's a great question, though, David. All right. Well, that does it. Well, that does it for Podcast 801, celebrating Podcast 800. And it's what we think about it. But share your thoughts and opinions, as always. Just go to theparcfermé.com, share your opinion. Decorum and civility, as always. If you like the podcast, go over to iTunes, give us a good rating. Do that also at Spreaker or any other outlet that you get our podcast from. A huge, huge thank you again to our Patreon supporters. We could not and would not do this podcast without you. And a huge, huge thank you to all of you that have been listening these many years to all of the podcasts. And if there's some podcasts, like Grace said, if there's some podcasts that stick in your mind for whatever reason, let us know what they are. I think I did get a communication from somebody the other day that's been listening since double digits. So that would have been, up to 99, late, I think he said in 70s, 80s, 90s, somewhere in that. And that's a long time to be listening. But anyway, huge thank you to all of you for that. And until next week, when we get back together to do this all over again for podcast number 802, this is Todd, a.k.a. Negative Camber, saying so long, Grace.
See you next week.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.